The following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
We are back. Golenbock University. I'm Ralph Tyko with the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. We're sans Alan Blumpkin tonight. I hope he's fine. I haven't heard from him today. But the professor is here, Peter Golenbock. How are you, sir?
I'm just fine. Thanks, Ralphie.
Good. First, I'd like to thank you for appearing on the debut of Comfortably Zoned in Lenny Randall's Hot Corner on Byline USA, Sports Byline USA, and it was the overnight edition. It's become a regular thing Thursday night, Friday morning, depending on where you are. It's at 10 o'clock Pacific Standard Time and 1 o'clock in the morning Eastern Time. Peter, you were so nice. 1 o'clock is an hour you rarely see. Am I correct?
Well, not usually. I don't see it. Well, I'll tell you something though. Back in 1980-81, I had a talk show on WOR in New York, and I knew all the people who worked around the clock, and it's truly remarkable, how many people are up listening to radio between the hours of midnight and 6 o'clock. One of the shows I used to do, Larry King had a wonderful show on, and he would air it from midnight till 3 o'clock in the morning. And that was a live show.
Do you remember when we were growing up, Long John Neble?
Sure.
That's
absolutely.
Live.
Oh, yeah.
He was a major influence in what I'm doing with this network. He'd have a panel of guests, some of the most interesting people in the world, and they just talk about everything from the paranormal to Madeline Murphy. The atheist was on a lot. And as a kid who was sleeping through high school, I got my education just by listening to late night Larry King, or in those days Long John Neble. Larry King carried on in
Who was the North Carolinian? There was a fellow from North Carolina. He had this deep, gravelly voice, and he did a talk show as well. And he was on every night. Boy, I wish I could remember.
Gene Shepard?
No, that was another one. Shepard was wonderful in his own way.
Yes, he was.
This was an interviewer. He was from North Carolina. I think he was from Raleigh. And he would interview important guests every night, and it was always fascinating to listen to him. It was just terrific.
I remember Barry Gray on WA.
Barry Gray was spectacular. He was fantastic. Yes. And, of course, the best of them all was Howard Cosell. Howard had his shows. He had Speaking of Sports, and I used to do a show every single year, and he was marvelous. And also Speaking of Everything. He had a show called Howard Cosell, Speaking of Everything, where he interviewed.
He always wanted to delve into things that weren't sports. He was so underrated as an intellect. He was an Army officer, had become an attorney first, and
he was a brilliant man. And I mean a brilliant man. It was interesting because he wanted to be a television broadcaster in an era when Jewish guys did not become TV stars for the most part. They looked like, who were the anchors? The great anchors, Walter Cronkite, or Dan Rather, or who was my pitcher for the CBS All-Stars? He was on Channel 2 in New York every night for years and years and years. They were the standards, from the Midwest. Very handsome-looking guy. And Howard was not that. Howard was a Brooklyn guy who had an accent, and he was very aggressive. Clearly, the sort of stereotyped Jewish pushy guy. And yet, he started by taking his tape recorder around and doing interviews and selling the interviews to independent stations. And eventually, he became, well enough situated that he was hired to do television in New York and then nationally. The guy was the best. He was absolutely the very best. And of course, when Muhammad Ali became the star athlete that he became, Howard and Ali became a twosome that you absolutely couldn't beat. The two of them each made each other, so much more famous than either of these famous guys were.
I don't think without Howard Cosell that the name switch, Howard called him Muhammad Ali.
Yeah.
Right away, he respected the fact that a man can be called any damn thing he wants to be called.
Yep.
And with that, conversely, as you say, without Ali, Howard would have been it wouldn't have been the same. Let's put it that way.
No, though Howard did things like Wide World of Sports. He had a pretty good following. Howard was one of the three guys from Monday Night Football.
Right.
At a certain point, they recognized that he was as good as anybody.
And he evoked emotion in his audience.
He did.
Either loved him or hated him, but they watched him.
Right. No. There's no two ways about that. And Larry King was the other one. I mean, my greatest disappointment was, each year doing this fabulous interview about the book that I was writing with Larry King, going down to Virginia and sitting in his in his studio from midnight until 3:00 in the morning. I mean, 3 hours is a long time to be sitting and talking about your book, but Larry King just made you feel so at home, and he asked the most intelligent questions, and the 3 hours went by like it was nothing. It was just amazing. And then after that, from 3:00 until 6:00 in the morning, they would replay the show. And boy, that sold a lot of books. It really did.
Nice. Larry King was more like Long John Neble than was Howard Cosell. Howard Cosell was an individual, and his interviews were one-on-one. They were tough interviews, where Larry King made it seem like you were family. You would settle in.
Very true.
It was a relaxing three. You couldn't take Howard for 3 hours.
He was not there to beat up on you. I mean, he was there. If he liked your book, he grew up in Brooklyn, and he was a friend of Sandy Koufax's when they were kids. And when I wrote Bums, you'd have thought that I had written the Bible. I mean, this was a book for him. Oh yeah. I mean, he just...
Hey, I was a Giant fan, and both Dynasty and Bums were Bibles to me. Later a Met fan, boy, when I discovered that book by you, that was terrific. But if you grew up any of the worshiping or rooting for any of the teams, you couldn't help but be enamored by the others in New York. It was just an incredible time, and that you didn't do, I've told you this before, that you didn't do a book on the Giants.
Yeah, they wouldn't let me. They wouldn't let me. Publishers didn't care about the Giants. I wanted to do the New York Giants and the San Francisco Giants, and not one publisher felt that there was an audience for it. Isn't that something?
Yeah, it really is, because what with Willie, especially.
Oh, yeah. Well, Willie went over to the Mets. And when I wrote the book Amazing about the Mets and started talking about the Mets of the early to middle 1970s. So Willie had come over to the Mets, and this was supposedly at the end of his career when he was slowing down and he was no longer, the greatest center fielder who ever lived. And he was being derided for being old and slow, and he couldn't do what he used to be, and yada, yada. And that's the sort of thing that you would hear in the newspapers. Well, I must have interviewed 7 or 8 players who played on Willie Mays' team, and they all basically said the same thing. They said, do you know who the best player was on the Mets? They said it was Willie Mays. I mean, the awe that these people had for the guy was just incredible. So I was fortunate that I had, it would have been wonderful to be able to write about Mays during the heart of it all.
Mm-hmm.
When I'm writing about the Brooklyn Dodgers, he was on the Giants there. He was in the on deck circle when Bobby Thompson hit that home run off of Ralph Branca in 1951.
Absolutely. One thing, there was a book by Charles Einstein, Willie's Time.
Yes, there was. Willie's Time, yes.
And that was, your books are up there with his, Bums and Dynasty, and his book is up there with yours.
Yes, absolutely. I knew him very, very well. He was a wonderful person and a terrific, terrific writer. That book, it could be that the publishers were right about not giving me money to do a book on the New York and San Francisco Giants. That book came out. It didn't do a whole lot. It didn't have very big legs for some reason, and it should have. It was a tremendous, tremendous book.
Really was, and the way it was laid out, it was, the chapters were the presidents of when Willie, in Willie's time.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it started with Garfield and so it told a great joke of, he did Einstein about Garfield. There was a woman comes up to him and says, President, my husband said you wouldn't say 2 words to me. Bet me you wouldn't say 2 words to me. And he said, he wins. Or you win.
Yeah, right. That's great. Yeah.
So it's amazing that all these presidents seem to have had a quick wit at one time or another in life. There are all these guys with all the sorrows that they suffered through as president. There was always that one line for all of them where you could relax. And as much as I thought Reagan was a detriment to this country and what have you, he's a charming man.
Yes, no question about it. I in my class on Thursday, we talked about Newt Rockne and Notre Dame and George Gipp, and I played for them the clip from the movie about Newt Rockne, where Ronald Reagan is playing Gipp, and he's lying in the hospital bed, and basically he's saying to Rockne, Gipp was dying. He had pneumonia and he was dying. He said, if there ever was a time when your boys are up against it, basically tell them to win one for the Gipper. And I'll tell you, Reagan was as handsome as any man you've ever seen in your whole life. And you had fought back tears. I mean, I've seen that clip, 100 times. And it's just amazingly, amazingly effective. And then, of course, Rockne, about 4 or 5 years later, when they were losing to Army, he went into the locker room during halftime, and he told that story about, George Gipp, who was this wonderful All-American player. Gipp was All-American 3 years. And he said, if ever there was one, a team when you're behind, tell them to win one for the Gipper. And the boys go flying out of the locker room, and they win the game against Army. It's just, as legend goes, you can't do much better than that.
Yeah. And he carried it over to the presidency. He carried that. I guess it's what got him by. Let's put it that way. Because if you look at it, he had an agenda.
He had an agenda. It's sort of the agenda that they have now. They want to basically take the money from the poor and give the money to the rich.
Which is so surprising, because wasn't he the head of the Screen Actors Guild?
He was head of the Screen Actors Guild, and he was a Democrat. But I'll tell you something. When these Democrats become Republicans, you very often become very, very conservative Republicans. They become disenchanted with the Democratic Party, and they go off in the other direction. And even though he was head of the Actors Union, he came to Washington, and basically one of the first things he did is he broke up the Union of the Air Traffic Controllers.
Oh,
and that has started. That was the beginning of the anti-union movement, which has reduced the unions from something like 50% now down to about 15% all over the country.
It reduced middle and upper middle class.
Yes,
is non-existent.
Right.
You're either rich or you're poor.
Mm-hmm.
And with the breaking
Reagan started that. And where we are today is the result of that.
And he's passing away, they tell me, today, critical condition, back in the hospital. George Bush. I think it's a disgrace that Ollie North became the head of the gun thing.
Of course,
the NRA, and it's a disgrace that those two sat in the basement of the White House and superseded Congress's mandates and sold guns to the Contras.
No two ways about it. There's no two ways about it.
And he's going to be so eulogized. Mm-hmm. And as a breeder, both sons screwed us up. The one who was in Florida and didn't count the Chads or whatever it was, didn't count the votes from the veterans. What it cost the election?
Oh, it cost the election. Of course it did. I mean, they ended up winning this election by something like 750 votes. Not only those Chads, but there was also the ballot where people ended up voting for Pat Buchanan when they had intended to vote for Al Gore. And so you had many of those ballots as well, and you couldn't fix them, and they wouldn't change them, and that certainly.
What gets me, I remember my reaction when it came down that the Supreme Court decided to go. It wasn't the Florida Supreme Court.
No, it was the United States Supreme Court, and it was taking place somewhere around December 12th, December 13th, and part of the thinking was, quite frankly, it's time. We don't have time to go and recount these ballots. We've got to make a decision now so that we can decide the presidency and get on with it. And that was basically their decision. And it was 5-4. The conservatives were 5, and the more liberal judges were 4.
Well, let's equate that to the instant replay in baseball. It
Sure.
slows down the flow of things.
Yeah.
As you said, well, it was time, and that was the flow. You got to get ready for this, that, and the other thing.
Yeah.
But isn't it nice to get the call right?
Yeah, but you're not talking about politics now. I'm talking about politics. This had to do with politics. I mean, you know that Jeb Bush was the governor of the state of Florida, and they had a Secretary of State who was also a Rockridge Republican, Kathleen Harris. Kathleen Harris was the granddaughter.
As if being the brother of the guy you're deciding the election for.
That is certainly true, too. And all of these people did everything they could. They did a bunch of things. They gerrymandered the state. They kept black people from voting. I mean, it was a whole, combination of things that ended up with the result that they were determined to get. They're much more determined to do this than the Democrats are.
Yeah. Well, there is the expression, you can't fight Republicans with Democrats because they just don't get it together for the close, the kill, whatever it is. There are so many unregistered or registered Democrats that don't come out to vote, and that's another thing about Americana that I don't understand. Our ancestors, mine certainly, came here with the hope that you could vote, and it was the biggest thing in civics class to become a citizen. I don't even know if they have that anymore.
Yeah, of course they do. But the thing that they could do, the one thing they could do if they wanted to do it, a lot of people don't vote because they can't leave their jobs. Instead of having the votes on a Tuesday, which is a work day, they really should have the voting on Saturday, which is the day that everybody has off, and that way it's not a conflict. You ought to be able to go and on your free time and go and vote.
Good idea.
Thanks.
Or make Election Day a holiday.
Make Election Day a holiday. That's another very good idea. Sure. Yeah. Or make it mandatory. Make voting mandatory. If you don't vote, you get fined.
Boy, that'd be a tough one to administer.
That would be a tough one, yes. But it's in certain countries in Europe, voting is mandatory. And
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Part
of it too, I do think, is that I believe that a lot of this advertising, which is done by PACs, and a lot of them are conservative PACs, I do think the purpose of a lot of it is to create so much unhappiness in a way that a lot of people just say the hell with it. They don't want to watch it on TV. They don't want to listen to it when people call them on the phone and talk about this candidate or that candidate. There reaches a point where a lot of people just tune the whole thing out. They just don't want to be bothered, and that's a problem too.
Yeah, you put all the politicians under one tent as if they're all corrupt.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
And
who could blame them? The two parties played good cop, bad cop with us every 4 years.
No question. So how are the San Francisco Giants doing?
Their pitching staff, Bumgardner beat up, Samalja beat up, Cueto beat up. Their closer, Mellencamp, although Strickland is doing well. More importantly, how is it that you're doing in your fantasy team?
Well, my fantasy team is doing better than my Rays team. Though I must say, my Rays team is really one of the most exciting teams in the major leagues right now. Believe it or not.
To watch.
It's the strangest thing. This is the strangest season. We have a record of 25 and 26, which is almost identical to the San Francisco Giants record, by the way. We started the season 1-8. We had a 6-game losing streak. And despite all that, we're slowly climbing back to 500, and I predict we'll be quite a bit ahead of it before we're done. And we're doing it in the most unorthodox way. They
in
traded
a tough
away,
division, too. Again,
in a tough
you got
division,
the Red
too.
Sox and the Yankees.
No two ways about it.
Yeah.
I mean, the three teams right now that are going to run away with it are the Red Sox, the Yankees, and the Houston Astros. Which one? I guess they lost today. They lost in 13 innings today. I think like 12 to 11, something like that. The Astros have the most amazing team. So there are still 3 other teams eligible to be in the postseason, and it would be very, very interesting to see the Rays make it. And it's not impossible, despite the fact that at the end of last season, the Rays gave up. Let me see, who did they give away? Morrison, Souza, Evan Longoria, who'd been their longtime guy, traded away Odorizzi, a pitcher of theirs, let a couple other guys go. I mean, we as fans were just stunned. And then they brought a bunch of other guys in. This guy Crone, a guy by the name of, let's see, who are some of the others? We've got Echeverria, he's terrific. We got Ramos, he's terrific.
Ramos really is.
But a guy named Robertson.
He hit like 3 home runs in 3 games.
Yeah. We've got Daniel Robertson, who's come out of nowhere to be a star. The guy's tremendous. They just brought up this guy, Christian Arroyo. The guy's 22 years old. He's a third baseman. He had 2 or 3 hits today and a couple of RBIs. I mean, he's
the guy they got for Longoria. I told you you'd be happy with him.
That's right.
Is Duffy playing?
Yeah, and Duffy's playing, and he's sensational. And I mean sensational. This guy is a star. So they got rid of all of our home run hitters. And then last week they got rid of Denard Span, and they got rid of Jesus Colome, who was our closer. So they're getting rid of guys left and right and left and right and left, leaving the fans absolutely just livid, if you want to know the truth. The last four games, our attendance were 11,000, 12,000, 12,000, 14,000 for the Red Sox and Baltimore. So a lot of fans are really disgruntled with this team. But I'm telling you, as this team goes on, there is a tremendous, and I mean tremendous, amount of team cohesiveness to these guys. And they're doing their craziest things with their pitching. You remember a couple of years ago, maybe 2-3 years ago, I guess it was the Rays who decided that they didn't want their pitchers to face the hitters 3 times, because all the stats guys put the numbers together and they saw the first time that a pitcher faces a batter, the batter hits 210. The second time a pitcher faces the batter hits 280. And the third time the pitcher faces the batter hits 345, something like that. So the idea was we didn't want the pitchers to face the batters on the other team 3 times, so we'll pull them after they face them twice, which could very well be like the 5th inning. And it was a disaster. I mean, the thing was,
burn up your bullpen.
It was laughable. Your starters were all pissed off because they were pulled out of games that they were pitching well in, and the bullpen was totally overloaded. Totally. Well, this year, these same geniuses came up with another idea along the same lines. Again, everybody's laughing at these guys until the team started winning doing it. They've done it now 4 times, and they've won 3 games. The one game they lost 2-0. So it wasn't the pitcher's fault. And here's the thinking. A lot of teams, for instance, the top 4 batters, 5 batters are all right-handers. So what the Rays have started to do, what Kevin Cash, our manager, is starting to do, is pitch Romo. Remember Romo, who led the San Francisco Giants to the World Series? Sergio Romo is pitching now the first inning and a couple outs of the second inning. And he's doing it magnificently. He didn't do it very well today, but he has been doing it beautifully. So he comes out, and then our starter comes in the second inning. And almost every time, the guy's been pitching through the 7th. Young kid. Yarborough. Our other young kids, 2-3 young kids pitching through the 7th. And then they bring in, a couple other their short guys and win the game.
Yeah, and the guys are pitching to the heart of the order. The first. Yeah.
Well, Romo's got this fabulous slider. He's a righty who throws, really tough breaking pitches. Strikes out a lot of people. He's really, really good. Now we got this guy Stanek, this young kid Stanek. He's 24. He throws 100. And they started him a couple of days ago, where he started and pitched the first inning and 2/3, struck out, 4 out of 5, something like that.
Wonder did his dad pitch Stanek for the Giants?
So. I think so. Yeah.
Well, if that be the case, I saw Stanek, Stanek's dad, pitch a 7-inning no-hitter in Springfield when I was about 15, and he's coming up. So there's some sort of connect in baseball that happens more than coincidence.
Yeah, no. I'll tell you what, but the difference between Stanek's dad, who threw 85, and this kid who throws between 95 and 100, I mean, these guys are huge. They are mooses, and they are strong.
But is the bulk that they're putting on, is their tendons and ligaments not able to handle this, and is that the result of bodies breaking down?
Well, I mean, part of it is a result of these guys pitching since they're 6 and 7 years old in Little League. I mean, I'll never forget the best player that I had playing for me in Little League it turned out he played in 2 other leagues because his father and mother were sure that this kid was going to be a major leaguer. Didn't tell any of the coaches he was pitching in the other 2 leagues, and by the time he was a sophomore in high school, he'd blown his arm out so badly that Tommy John surgery couldn't do anything for him. I mean, it was terrible. I mean, Little League is part of the problem, and a lot of these kids have Tommy John surgery in high school.
Yeah. Electively, some
definitely electively.
Because
a lot of them
it allegedly makes you a better pitcher if you come through it. But everybody
doesn't come through it. Everybody comes through it. They all come through it.
No, I don't mean come through it living. I mean
no. You come through it with your arm intact is what I'm talking about. They Dr. Job perfected this thing so beautifully. Dr. Joe, by the way, is in the Baseball Hall of Fame. I went to his induction.
Oh, really?
Yeah. He was there with Tommy.
Didn't know that.
But we got this kid.
I have Tommy John's phone number, and I've been trying to call him. Love him to be a guest on your show. I'll keep trying for that. Yeah. Who would have thunk that a guy would be remembered, pretty good pitcher in his day, and was able to be an effective pitcher after he lost his fastball too. Some guys,
Tommy John bobblehead with the scar.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's clever.
Yeah, I know.
That's clever. We touched on this before, and on our new show on the radio, we're going to talk a lot about trading cards, baseball cards, memorabilia, collector's items, and what have you. Tell me a Barry Halperin story. You and
Barry Halper was a close friend of mine. Barry owned 1 share of the Yankees. He was a crazy, crazy baseball fan. When he was 15 years old, he somehow inherited $15,000 from somebody, probably his grandfather. And instead of doing what all the kids did, that age who would end up, money like that, which is either go buy yourself a car or invest in the stock market, Barry went out and invested in baseball cards. He bought, with $15,000 in the 1970s, he was able to buy, the most magnificent cards you could ever imagine. And he just kept building from there. He built a collection that was truly unbelievable. He basically had every baseball card.
His collection, more than just the cards, with the amazing array of uniforms. He had racks, like in a clothing store, tailor racks of, Ty Cobb, Joe DiMaggio.
Sure. All that stuff is now in the Hall of Fame. It's all in the Hall of Fame. Barry sold the best part of his collection to the Hall of Fame for $10 million.
Oh, okay. Now, Hall of Fame pays for stuff?
It's the Hall of Fame doesn't pay for anything, but there's a family who sort of owns the Hall of Fame. The Hall of Fame is not owned by baseball. The Hall of Fame is owned by this woman who was part of the family that started the whole thing back when, and I can't remember her name. But obviously she's a big baseball fan too. But somehow the family paid Barry the $10 million so that the Hall of Fame could have the collection in the hall.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, and I think once you told me that there was something a little bit weird about his collection.
After he died, Barry unfortunately had diabetes. And it eventually killed him, which is terrible. It was funny. I had flown Barry
at a very
young age. I had flown Barry down to St. Petersburg here because I had the bright idea that we would open it would be a museum, American Museum of the National Pastime. And at the time, which was about 1992, we had a wonderful building that we could have had 3 floors of the building for his collection. And we flew him down, showed him the building. He could have charged $10, $15 to get in, and he would have filled the place all the time. what I didn't know was that he was dying. And basically he said to me, I can't do this because after I die, I really don't trust my wife to, get the most out of my collection. So basically he went home, and he was able to sell his collection. There's an auction that he did. I was one of the people who wrote the preface to the auction. It was the most amazing auction of baseball stuff. But after he gave sold the $10 million to the Baseball Hall of Fame, he had another auction where he made another $10 or $15 million.
There was a book.
That's the book. That's what I'm talking about.
Of his stuff. The
Correct.
book itself is a beautiful book.
It's a beautiful book. It was put together.
And you wrote the introduction.
I was one of the people. I think Ted Williams may have written something too, and somebody else that I can't remember who it was. Barry had a lot of friends in baseball. Barry was an owner of the Yankees. He sat in the owner's box, and nobody loved the game. Nobody loved the Yankees as much as Barry did. He was just, he was a wonderful character, and I was very sad when he died.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. Appreciate it.
Well, you were asked.
Yeah. Well, you're the most honest and open guy in the world. I saw a Facebook posting of yours this week. You always take the high road on everything. Lenny Dykstra, former New York Met, former client of yours, who, if that's the word, I don't know how you.
Well, we were partners. We were partners for 9 months. Yeah. We were a team. Lenny and I were a team.
He took your writing and never paid you. Flat out.
That's what he did.
Yeah, and you took the high road.
You don't write books with addicts. It's just you just don't do it. And the problem, of course, is when you sign up to do a book with an addict, you know damn well that you're in for a very, very exciting, fun ride. And it was. It was a hoot. If you read the book, you'll see what a hoot it was. Unfortunately,
I'm sorry to see him come to this. Whatever it was this week that caused him to get arrested, you threaten an Uber driver with a gun, that's going to reduce your rating from a 5 to a 1 right away. And you're on, obviously still using, as you said, you expected him to end up in jail someday, but it's still a tragedy no matter what.
Of course. Oh, yeah. Without a doubt it is. Yeah, but it's funny. I mean, Lenny's been doing this sort of thing for 15, 20 years, and he was jailed once before for other transgressions.
Right, something with
this could be the end of Lenny's freedom for quite a long time, unfortunately.
Well, yeah, because I guess when he got off the first time, when you go back for something else, they don't take kindly to that.
No, they don't. They really don't. It was interesting because Lenny was very, very proud of the fact that he lived in Beverly Hills. He was a very, very good friend of the actor from 2.5 Men, the one who was also a drug addict.
Oh yes.
Tell me his name.
He was in the baseball movie.
He was in
Major League, which is one of
Major League. He was an 8-man out too. He was wonderful.
I don't remember him in 8-man out.
Yeah, he played.
But I
tell you who he played. He played Buck Weaver. Weaver.
Okay.
I'm going to type into Google who played Buck Weaver. It was killing me. I can't remember his name, so I should.
I watched a terrific baseball movie this week on the baseball channel. It's For the Love of the Game, and it's really well.
All right. It's all right.
What's your favorite baseball movie, Peter?
My favorite baseball movie, and I'm embarrassed to say it, is The Natural. And the other baseball movie. Charlie Sheen is who I'm trying to think of. Charlie Sheen was the actor. And Charlie had his own problems. And he and Lenny were very, very close friends, which was interesting. And then they had a fallout, and apparently they're not friends anymore. But Lenny loved living in Los Angeles, loved living in Beverly Hills, Love having his own jet plane, his own, multi-million-dollar jet. Love living, high on the hog. And then the whole thing fell apart, and it just killed him emotionally. He wasn't able to handle it. Yeah. So my favorite movies is The Natural is probably my favorite movie, and the other movie that I adore is League of Their Own. That's Tom Hanks playing Jimmy Fox as the coach of this women's baseball team during the war. Marvelous movie.
Absolutely. No crying in baseball.
There's no crying in baseball. You'd be amazed how often I say that to people. These little kids standing on the street crying away, and I'll go up to them and go, there's no crying in baseball. And right then and there, they stop crying. It's absolutely hilarious.
Baseball will make you cry and make you stop crying.
That's right. That's exactly right. So I would say to you,
get our emotions other than family. Because baseball is a religion, as you said on the show.
That's right.
It's where we worship. It
is indeed. It is indeed. Always did, always will. It's the funniest thing. You're born with a gene. It's the baseball gene.
But
you have it, or you don't. And that's why when I have, teach that baseball course during the spring at USF St. Pete, I try to inculcate that into my students so that they will develop that baseball gene.
Well, I'll tell you, Larry David on his show had Mel Brooks, and Mel Brooks tells the story. Or you got it, or you ain't. He said some Greek actor told him that, and Mel says, you can't start a sentence with or. He says, or you got it, or you ain't.
That is classic. And on that note, I'm preparing for Homeland.
Down we go. Thank you, sir.
My pleasure.
We'll talk to you next week.
All right. Have a great week. Take care.
Love you, Lenny, I say. I love you, Peter. Be well.